All right, good afternoon, everybody. We're gonna get started to maximize the time we spend in this interesting conversation. My name is Eliana La Ferrara. I'm a professor of public policy here at the Kennedy School, also faculty chair of the MPID program, and the co-organizer of the Rethinking Progress initiative with Surbi Bharadwaj, who's here and will moderate today's conversation. So before introducing our incredibly interesting and influential speaker and our moderator, I wanted to say a couple of words about this initiative. Rethinking Progress is a year-long discussion-based program that brings together students from Harvard and faculty to question how we define and measure progress. It's a bottom-up initiative that pretty much emerged from conversation that we had in class, and where we realized that many of us were eager to challenge the prevailing paradigm and try to think how we could improve society and the planet with our work. And so you can see that the theme of today's meeting is really squarely within our ambition, moral ambition. We've been organizing this program around themes like foundations of economics, planetary limits, technology, democratic erosion. And for each team, we've been convening small groups where about 20, 25 of us were discussing around the table, and public events like today's event, where we extend the discussion to people from all over campus. And if you will enjoy today's discussion, I want to make a pitch for the last public event of this year, which is going to take place on April 29, and it's going to be another fireside chat conversation between Sam Bowles and Danny Roderick and myself. And so I want to thank the people who made this all possible. In terms of support, endorsement, and funding, the Dean's Office that allowed us to launch this initiative. In terms of everything logistic related and organizational, Christine Juba, who has a specialty of disappearing when I thank her, but today, thanks to Rutger, she didn't run away, and she's here because she wants to listen. And then Surbi, who's there, and literally I couldn't have done this without her help because she's been amazing. So let me start introducing the guests. Rutger Bregman is a Dutch historian, and he's the best-selling author of Utopia for Realists, Humankind, and lately Moral Ambition. His books have been translated into 46 languages and sold over 2.5 million copies worldwide. And in 2024, Rutger co-founded the School for Moral Ambition, which is a nonprofit that helps talented professionals redirect their careers towards the world's most pressing challenges. He's a veteran of Davos, where he famously confronted billionaires on tax avoidance. And he's one of the most widely read public intellectuals working on the topics that we're tackling with this series. So we're really excited to welcome him. We're grateful that he accepted our invitation, and we're sure that he'll contribute enormously to the discussion around this initiative. So for Surbi, I want to add that she will be moderating the conversation, but she's an extremely interesting young public intellectual herself. She's a final year student in the joint MPID MBA program at Harvard Kennedy School and Harvard Business School. She started her career as a management consultant in New York, and later transitioned to work at Give Directly, which is a nonprofit that sends unconditional cash transfers to people in extreme poverty around the world. And I see some approval for this pivot that she made. And she's one of the many brilliant students that I've had the privilege of interacting with in the MPID program. So after finishing grad school this semester, Surbi will continue to work on scaling effective philanthropy at coefficient giving. So I will stop here. I want to express my enthusiasm for this meeting to all of you, those whom I've met already and those whom I haven't. I hope you will take this as a seed for your future thinking, your future action, and that eventually with many of the people around Harvard, we're not alone. There are efforts at HBS. Mark Inkster, who's here, is spearheading another similar initiative. I think we can make progress towards goals that we all can be proud about. I will stop.
Thank you so
Over
much.
to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. I know everyone's here to listen to Rutger, but I have one more final announcement to make before we start. So in the spirit of speaking beyond ivory towers, this event is being recorded and will be publicly disseminated. So as a quick reminder, photographs, videos, and audio recordings are being produced today. By being in this area of campus, you consent to being photographed, videotaped, and audio taped, and you authorize Harvard to use any of these recordings for its activities, as well as for its promotional materials. If you have any questions, please contact Christine, whose contact details are listed on the signs outside. And towards the end, we will be taking audience questions. And if you have a question, we ask that you would, at the end, come up front and fill out one of these release forms. It just requires your signature. Okay, with that out of the way. Thank you so much for being here. This, I think, is a beautiful arc in my own journey from being in grad school and sort of grappling with a lot of the questions that you've been addressing through your public writing over the last decade. So selfishly, my first question is a little bit about me. So I grew up in India. I, from a young age, cared a lot about solving extreme poverty. That motivated me to apply to undergrad at Yale. Did all the right things, was doing econ research, traveling to places. And then, as Eliana mentioned, my first job out of college was in management consulting in New York. So to kick off for the audience, what is your message to people like me who had the right intentions, really wanted to do the right thing, but somehow still ended up in consulting after that?
Yeah, stop wasting your talent and start making a difference. This is something I've been obsessed with my whole career, ever since I wrote Utopia for Realists, which was when I was 25. How is it possible that there are so many smart, driven, bright students who somehow end up in, indeed, what a good friend of mine calls the Bermuda Triangle of talent, which is consultancy, finance, and corporate law. And maybe you should add big tech to that. Yeah, it's a shame. It really is a shame. If you read these application essays that they write when they come in, what was yours about?
Extreme poverty.
Extreme poverty, yeah. And it's global health. It's about, protecting democracy. It's preventing the next pandemic. But then somehow along the way, this career funneling process starts to happen, and they're being harassed and attacked relentlessly by the McKinseys and the JP Morgans of this world, who really have hacked the brains of these, vulnerable minds. A little bit like how big tech, with social media has hacked our minds as well. And they end up wanting things that they never even knew existed in the first place. Suddenly they think in order to be successful, I need to start making PowerPoint decks for people I don't like. So how's this happened? And how can we change that? Because for me, it seems kind of obvious that we need the best and brightest to work on the most pressing global issues.
Yeah. So, quick follow-up on that, and I think, rationalization at the time was kind of this idea that I do this first job, it helps me build all these skills, and then I can deploy that in a more effective way at a higher leverage position in the future. And you that was my sort of micro arc, but at a macro scale, you also do see that in the revolving door between government and the private sector, right? So the Secretary of Treasury, Commerce, etc. today are all from the private sector. So to a young student here right now who thinks that, maybe rising up to be partner at McKinsey and then transitioning into a high-level decision-making position in government, what do you have to say to that?
Yeah, this is the question that we get again and again. So yesterday I was at Yale, and the same question came up again. Shouldn't I just give me 2 or 3 years? I'll learn a lot at a place like McKinsey or anywhere else. And there is something to be said for it, but I think it should be your 16th or your 17th option on the list, especially at a place like this. Come on. We're at one of the most prestigious universities in the world. If you're here, you can do something. And sure, there are jobs out there that are competitive, right? You're going to work at, coefficient giving? Competitive place, right? It's not easy to get a job there, but you're smart, you're ambitious, you can do something. So especially for people here, the message is come on, try the more interesting thing, the more challenging thing here. And if you if you've really done your research and you've applied to a lot of positions, and at the end you're like, you can do that year at McKinsey, but immediately start working on your escape plan. And also, there are some ways. My co-founder, Willem, always says this: like, there are ways you can protect yourself. One easy thing you can do is to do a giving pledge. I think you've done that as well. I'm also a member of an organization called Giving What We Can. People pledge to donate at least 10% of their income to highly effective charities. I think that helps a lot, because if you give a substantial amount of money of that, nice salary you get in one of those places, then every year you're forced to think about, what are the most important issues that we ought to work on. And I found that to be a pretty transformational thing to just start giving.
Yeah, so maybe on that point of people come in very idealist and they're like swayed by these like companies that are wooing them from those like second they set foot on campus, right?
Yeah.
A lot of the School of Moral Ambitions work right now focuses on elite college campuses. And one might say that like elite college campuses also attract the most risk-averse people, right? Because you've kind of followed the playbook, done your applications, done your standardized testing and gotten here.
Yeah.
So I guess why focus on these elite campuses as opposed to say like going to developing countries or going to a state school where maybe they have fewer resources and people might be more willing to take a risk, just absent other options?
Yeah. A couple of things to be said about that. First, I think we start with the problems that we want to solve. Like, for example, one problem that we started working on in Europe is big tobacco, which still is the single largest cause of preventable disease. We're talking about 8 million deaths every year, and very few people work on it. With our first fellowship of 12, really committed, talented people that we convinced to quit their job as a corporate lawyer, for example, we already doubled the lobbying capacity, the anti-lobbying capacity against big tobacco. And yes, we're obsessed with talent. We recognize that. Sometimes people say like, "Oh, you start your fellowship at Harvard; those are just a bunch of privileged kids." To be honest, that's not really my experience so far. I was just speaking to some undergrads today. And I'm just honestly quite in awe of what they're doing when they're still 19 or 20. I mean, I know what I was doing when I was 20 and studying at this very mediocre university called Utrecht University in the Netherlands. And I was mainly drinking Trappist beer, Belgian beer, and sitting on the Utrecht wharves, near the canal. I think it's a huge problem that we have these extraordinary concentrations of both talent and of privilege, people who could go on and make a massive difference, but they end up in this Bermuda triangle that we talked about. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't also have, more opportunities at public school. Totally get that. But this is the problem that we are now working on.
Yeah. And then what is the sort of medium to long-term theory of change? Because you run this fellowship for undergrads. And you have things like Teach for India, Venture for America.
Yeah.
There are analogous sort of social impact immersion programs that a lot of people honestly like just end up back in law school or business school after them. So like, how are you thinking about like value drift after the fellowship?
Yeah.
Maintaining that community.
Yeah. So I talked quite extensively about Teach for America with Wendy Kolb, who founded that. And yes, it's true that most of them are not a teacher after a decade. But the statistics are quite impressive that people who have gone through TFA, many decades later, there's still a public service aspect to their work. So it is like this, how do you say that? Like this vaccination that you get early on in your career, and that it's hard to really move on to the soul. What's the word? Soul-sucking, soul-crushing corporate job after that. So that's one thing. The other thing is that we are really trying to change the culture here. I was really excited to see all these pieces about moral ambition in the Harvard Crimson in the last couple of weeks. Because on the one hand, yes, we're like creating a program, we're creating pathways for the most talented undergrads who want to do something else. But by making it really cool, for lack of a better word, and desirable, I think we're also trying to change the culture on campus. And obviously Harvard is a hugely symbolic place. So we've seen that, a lot of people at other universities also reached out to us like, hey, we want that as well. This seems awesome. Yeah. And that's, I guess, also my read of of history. I've spent quite some time studying some of the greatest moral revolutions of the past, mainly the abolitionist movement in Great Britain in the late 18th century. And there's one thing that really, really struck me as I studied that, which was that it was part of a broader cultural movement in which these people were able to redefine what it means to live a successful life. They basically wanted to bring virtue back in fashion. That's like William Wilberforce, the great abolitionist, main mission in life was like, we got to make doing good fashionable. And I think that's also what we're trying to do here. It's one of the bottlenecks that we're trying to solve, that people don't have the feeling like, oh, you go at that cute nonprofit, give directly. No, it's like, that's one of the most awesome things you can do. Like they've given away, what is it, $1 billion by now? Like just imagine the impact. It's just, sure, if you want to go to, the investment banker job, if you want to work at McKinsey, that's fine. I mean, it's not, you're not suddenly a bad person. You're just a boring person.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit more about, I'm a few years out of Gen Z now. So like, what is cool? How do you make something seem cool?
Well, I think the poster that was most successful that we had here on campus was you didn't fight your way into Harvard to end up in a bullshit job. That resonated immensely. So we can have some fun, right? We shouldn't adopt that attitude where you start pointing finger and saying like, you're immoral for doing this, you're a bad person for doing that. No, it's okay. It's a free country. If you want to go that boring path, that's totally fine. Mm-hmm. But if you want to do something more interesting, yeah.
Have you seen any like backlash or like, I feel like amongst corporates, in recruiting events, I often see like their social impact work being highlighted the most, and then you get there and you realize, oh, that's like 1% of their portfolio.
Yeah.
So have you seen any?
We haven't seen backlash. We have seen copycat behavior. The most hilarious, like these ads of McKinsey recently, that were all about, oh, you might be, in the wrong job and the purpose washing, blah, blah, blah. But it's just hilarious because that's a great opportunity for us to make fun of them. Yeah. So I love my job right now. It's just, yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. We were talking about earlier, and you've written a bit about sort of historical antecedents to what you're doing with
yes.
So there's like the Fabian Society on the left, neoliberal movement, Federalist Society in the US legal system. Could you speak a little bit more about these sort of historical precedents for doing this kind of movement building and like making people move into certain professions?
Yeah, sure. So I already talked about that one obsession that I had ever since I was 25 and wrote my first book, Utopia for Realists, which was The Waste of Talent. The other thing that I've always been obsessed with is the power of small groups of really committed people to change the world. We all know that famous Margaret Mead quote, right? That should never underestimate the power of small groups of committed citizens to change the world. In fact, it's the only thing that ever has. And already in that first book, Utopia for Realists, I wrote about the rise of neoliberalism. Right? I was obsessed with how do ideas actually, move from the fringes to the mainstream? How does a utopia become reality? For better or for worse, because your utopia might not be my utopia. But indeed, that was a story of people who came together in this small Swiss village called Mont Pelerin, where they really said to themselves, like, we're the resistance right now. Everyone is a social democrat. All of politics and economics has turned Keynesian. After the economist John Maynard Keynes, and they were like, we're going to build a resistance movement. We're going to reinvent liberalism. We want to, free markets again. And it took them such a long time, right, to build out the whole ecosystem, to build the institutions, the think tanks, the talent pipelines. And they said to each other, that Milton Friedman had this famous quote, that in the end, it is crises that change everything, imagined or real, and that when that crisis hits, you got to have done your homework because everything depends on the ideas lying around. And that obviously happened in the 70s. And then later, politicians like Reagan and Thatcher came in. So that's just one case study that I was fascinated by a decade ago. But then indeed, there are also other case studies. Recently for the BBC, I was invited to give the so-called Reith lectures. And indeed, there I talked about the rise of social democracy in the late 19th and the 20th century. And it's a fairly similar story in the United Kingdom of a group called the Fabian Society, of intellectuals, people like George Bernard Shaw, Emmeline Pankhurst, Bertrand Russell was involved for a while, who had all these crazy radical ideas, such as we need an 8-hour working week, we need, universal healthcare, we need universal suffrage. And they started building out the institutions. Like they created the Labour Party, for example. They created the London School for Economics. And I've always admired that. People who don't just, talk the talk, but also walk the walk and are able to institutionalize their ideas and have that long-term view, have that perseverance, They understand that if you can achieve your goals during your lifetime, you're probably not thinking big enough. So yeah, that's...
No, that makes complete sense. So maybe, okay, let's follow your arc here. So we move someone away from consulting, they are, ambitious and they decide to join the World Bank or like a charity or philanthropy or something. So a friend of mine here coined a term, the Bermuda Triangle of doing good, which was international institutions, IMF, World Bank, UN, charities, philanthropies, and then corporate social responsibility. So often people who are like smart, agentic, want to do good, end up in these places and quickly realize that, I'm either writing reports no one reads, like I'm at the whim of politicians, I'm basically doing PR washing for someone else, and then they become jaded, burnt out, and essentially stop giving a damn in some way. What do you have to say to people like those?
Okay, so
how to avoid that trap?
There's a lot of truth in that. I did, like I heard about that the first time today, the Bermuda Triangle. But it's very true, right? I have some experience now after 2 years of walking around in the world of philanthropy, and it is pretty shocking how messed up the incentives are. Obviously, also because of a lack of feedback loops, right? If you mess up as an entrepreneur at some point, you're going to go bust. If you mess up as a politician, hopefully they'll vote you out at some point. But in the world of philanthropy, you can keep doing ineffective things for such a long time, as long as your PR is good, and as long as you make your donors happy and name enough buildings after them, then you're going to be fine. It's easy to get burned out in those kind of institutions. At the same time, I'm like, okay, if you're really ambitious, if you're really talented, that's also an exciting challenge, right? In the book, I talk about some of the most successful policy entrepreneurs. I talk about, for example, what Ralph Nader did in the 60s and the 70s. With this incredible movement of the so-called Nader's Raiders. He recruited some of the smartest kids at Harvard, at Yale, at Princeton, and said, don't go and work for some law firm. Instead, go and work for the people, right? They already have their lobbyists. Now we need lobbyists for the people. And at some point, they had their fingerprints on 25 pieces of federal legislation. Now, that was really difficult, hard work, to get things done in government institutions who back then were also, really sclerotic, bureaucratic. But you can also see that as a challenge, right? And especially if you do it with each other, then things that are initially seemingly really boring can get extremely exciting. Like you should talk to some of the members in our community, like my co-founder, Jan Willem, for example. He's like our Brussels super nerd. Like if you look in his eyes when he starts talking about policy making in Brussels, like for him, it is like the most, pure pleasure.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
But if you feel really alone in one of those jobs, then it's hard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, and maybe coming to then some policy prescriptions you had recommended in Utopia for Realists, which you originally wrote in 2014, I believe. So at the time you'd proposed 3 radical ideas: universal basic income for everyone, a short working week of 15 hours, and open borders worldwide with free movement. So now we're 12 years away from that. Do you think any of these have become more or less likely? Have they become more or less radical? And if you were to write this book today, would you change any of them? Would you add any new ones?
So let me first make a general observation. So I wrote that book, indeed, as a young man. I was 25. And the main reason why I wrote that book was because I was so bored with politics, especially in Europe, maybe especially in a country like the Netherlands, where I grew up in. I was like, what's at stake? Like, where are the big ideas? We've achieved some extraordinary things, like groups like the Fabian Society. They made the impossible reality. But what's the next big thing? Like, what's the next big utopian dream that we're fighting for? So I wanted politics to be interesting again. Now, I basically got half of what I wished for in that book, about 50%. Politics is certainly not boring anymore, but those utopian dreams that I, was so excited about, they, you could argue that in some respects we've made some progress. Like I wrote about Give Directly in that book, which was still, relatively small NGO at the time. Now it's huge. You guys have given away $1 billion. So that notion of poverty is just a lack of cash. It's not a lack of character. And the way to solve that is just by giving people money. That was a simple meme. And I'm really proud that, it's one of the things I'm most proud of in my career, that I've helped spread that simple, profound, and very true insight that whenever we help people, cash should be the benchmark. There are interventions that are more effective, definitely. With its, malaria bed nets or structural interventions, but you better make the case that it's better than cash, because cash is pretty great.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So there we've made some progress, and you could also argue that now with the rise of AI, that discussion around universal basic income is going to be much more pressing, and perhaps we shouldn't even be calling it universal basic income anymore, but more something like universal basic wealth, right? That we find a way that everyone becomes a shareholder in this robot AI economy, because we're now on track towards a world with like 7-8 trillionaires who will rule everything. I'm pretty alarmed. So that has, to be honest, that has changed. Like when I wrote that book, I had a pretty optimistic attitude to history. I was like, I wasn't going like full Steven Pinker, but I was like, we're on track as a species. I don't really feel that anymore. Yeah. I sometimes have trouble, getting to sleep at night, because I think we're really fucked right now. Yeah. To put it bluntly.
Could you speak a little bit more about that arc? Because I also noticed it I feel like Humankind, Utopia for Realists was very optimistic about human agency. And then Humankind had a brief moment of pause of like, oh, maybe like settled agriculture and like civilization wasn't all that it was cracked up to be. And like, and then, I think Moral Ambition is a more sort of meta ethics book. What has that arc been for you over the last decade?
Yes. So the arc was that indeed it started with, can we make utopian thinking fashionable again? Can we bring utopia back in politics? What's the next big thing? And then it turned out that many of the ideas that I was most excited about, whether it was universal basic income or different ways of doing participatory democracy, like with a lottery, for example, like all of these ideas relied on a different view of human nature, a more positive, a more hopeful view of human nature. And so many of the systems that we currently have in place, both in the world of business and the world of politics, they are grounded in a very cynical view of who we are as a species. You can see that actually if you look at the American Constitution, if you look at the debates that the founding fathers had, they were like, people are fundamentally selfish, and therefore we need to design our institutions so that we will keep those selfish people in check. And I was like, that's like the fundamental mistake we made at the beginning, because what you assume in other people is what you get out of them. If you assume that people are fundamentally selfish, then that's the kind of behavior that you're gonna elicit. So in that book, I wanted to go really deep and basically try and show that there was now a lot of new evidence from anthropology, from sociology, from economics, actually, from psychology, that show that, well, people are clearly not angels. We're capable of the most terrible behavior. But at, a pretty fundamental level, we're pretty decent. So some evolutionary anthropologists call this survival of the friendliest, and then make the case that throughout the centuries, throughout the millennia, it was actually the most friendliest among us who had the most kids and the biggest chance of passing on their genes to the next generation. And what was so interesting there is, like, I've always been a generalist, right? Initially, when I was, 23, 24, I was like, I want to become a professor. But then I realized it would take 30 years before I was allowed to perhaps write the books I wanted to write. And then I said, you know what, I'm just going to be a generalist from day one. And so what I realized is that very often, like the top psychologist didn't realize what was going on in anthropology, right? And that was one of the great things about that book, that I was able to connect the dots. But then, and sorry, this is a long story, but I promise I'll finish quickly. What happened is that I had a little bit of a midlife crisis, because I started seeing these images of people reading Humankind, saying, oh, life is not as bad as I thought it was. People are great, actually. And I'm reading this wonderful book on a beach in Bali. And, don't follow the news anymore. Just don't worry, be happy. And I was like, oh my God, I've created a monster. That wasn't the message. And the book had done really well. I had made quite some money with it. And I was like, okay, but what do I do now, right? And I felt I really needed a big kick in the ass. So that's when I started working on moral ambition, because I felt like after the warm hug of Humankind, I needed a cold shower. And I'm happy to give other people cold showers now as well.
Yeah. When you started working on moral ambition, did the book come first, or did the idea of the fellowship, or what was the sequencing? What was that journey?
The book. Yeah, definitely the book.
And
I had some people around me who pushed me pretty hard and said, look, you've been doing this for more than a decade now. You can keep doing this, write another book. It's a nice idea. People read it. It ends up on bookshelves, and that's it. Maybe it's time to be a little bit more ambitious now. I've got that quote from the economist Tyler Cowen at the beginning of chapter 2 that have made a deep impression on me. And I'm paraphrasing here. He said something like one of the most impactful things and one of the most easy things you can do is to raise other people's aspirations. And that's what happened to me. I just had a couple of people in my life who, pushed me quite a bit and said, like, Rutger, it's nice what you've done, but I'm kind of disappointed if you now don't take the next step. And yeah, for them, that was really easy. That was like maybe one good conversation. And now I've, been doing this for 3-4 years, working my ass off.
Yeah. One connection I've noticed between moral ambition, and you acknowledge the effective altruism movement a lot in the book as well.
Yeah.
The effective altruism movement has a sort of like unifying ethical framework of utilitarianism, which you can agree with, disagree with, but they do have sort of this foundational set of assumptions that they share, which leads you to like be able to cause prioritize and kind of agree on these are the most impactful things you can be working on at a given point in time. The School of Moral Ambition has a few areas that you've prioritized, including tax system fairness, tobacco cessation, and food system reform. But I think in the book, I struggle a little bit to find what that ethical framework was.
Yes.
So could you speak a little bit more about how you narrow down to these 3 areas? Because they also like seem a lot more institutional and systemic than sort of classic EA areas. So, which is great, but also why this and not say health system reform or something
There's
else.
a lot to say about this. So, indeed, I think effective altruism is more inspired by that tradition of utilitarianism, which is a very powerful tradition, right? If we look at, like, say, Jeremy Bentham or John Stuart Mill and what they advocated for, I think they were, far ahead of their time. They advocated for women's rights. Jeremy Bentham has that famous footnote where he says, hey, we should also consider animal rights and animal suffering. If you read Immanuel Kant, I mean, he was worrying about jerking off, and that is a big problem. That didn't pan out very well. So I think, we got to give credit where credit is due. At the School for More Ambition, we try to be more pluralist, though. We have a more morally pluralist approach. So we also think there's a lot of value in the social justice approach. Maybe also more value in the social democratic approach that is more suspicious of power concentration. I think that's one of the critiques I would have of my effective altruist friends, is that they're very comfortable with billionaires as long as those billionaires, give them some money. I also find it interesting that a cause that obviously I thought has been important for a long time, indeed the cause of tax fairness, that more effective altruists are now also getting interested in it because of AI and the massive power concentration there. So I do feel kind of vindicated there. If you ask me, like, what is the great tradition that we're talking about here, I would say it is the tradition of universalism that goes all the way back to the abolitionists. So abolitionism, as it got started in the 18th century, was a mixture of Enlightenment thinking and of a form of Christianity that really took the suffering of other people seriously. It was really those two things. It was the pamphlet and the pulpit that combined into a religion of action. Because that is the crucial thing. There's an amazing book by Christopher Leslie Brown about British abolitionism, which is one big meditation on why do people practice what they preach? Because usually we don't, right? We have all kinds of convictions and beliefs. Like, I think probably all of us don't really like factory farming, but I would suspect that most of you eat meat, right? So there's a little bit of a disconnect there, which is normal throughout history. Like, the vast majority of people in the 18th century, were kind of like, yeah, slavery. Yeah, of course, it's not super moral, but what are you going to do about it? And what happened in the 18th century is that suddenly something shifted and people started acting on their beliefs. And I think that movement was the mother of all movements in two ways. So quite literally, actually, so many of the suffragettes, for example, who fought for women's right to vote, had parents who were abolitionists. Many of the civil rights campaigners had parents or grandparents who were abolitionists. So it's really something that was passed on from generation to generation. But it also, ideologically speaking, it was the great universalist tradition, the recognition that each and every one of us has inherent dignity, that we are all holy, that every human being is worthy and deserves to be protected. Everyone has rights. And that culminated, obviously, in the Great Declaration of Human Rights after the Second World War, which was an extraordinary moment, right? For the first time in human history, all those countries agreed upon this utopian document that obviously we were nowhere near achieving, but it was like this promise. It became the Bible of universalism. And I think, after some time, that language of human rights, it came a little bit, how do you say that, of a cliche. People started getting used to it, and we forgot like how radical that promise was and how amazing this tradition is. That people have been fighting for this for 250 years to try and expand the moral circle, and we're still in the midst of that fight. And that's how I really look at what we're trying to do at the School for More Ambition. That's the tradition that I think we're a part of, and maybe it's become clearer now because the tradition is so clearly under threat. Right? Listen to someone like J.D. Vance. Listen to his speech that he gave not long ago at the Claremont Institute. Like, it's so clear that these people think that we should actually shrink the moral circle, that being an American, for example, is about blood and soil, basically, that the fact that your parents grew up here, that makes you an American, that it's not about an idea, it's not about the Declaration of Independence and, the pursuit of life, liberty, happiness, whatever. Yeah, that's the tradition. That's my religion of action.
Yeah. Maybe just to push you on that a little bit, and this betrays why I'm going to work where I'm going to work. Like, you can be a universalist and come to a completely different set of three ideas as well,
yes,
right?
Sure.
So, like, how did you arrive to those three? I noticed that they're not the same that you talked about in Utopia for Realists. So, like, what about these three ideas on like tax, tobacco, and food right now that makes them particularly?
Yeah, and we're expanding to more things. So we're going to work on democracy as well and AI safety. Mm-hmm. So in that sense, we're really inspired by our effective altruist friends who I always call this and some of my colleagues will get really tired when I say this again, but I always call the Gandalf Frodo model of doing good, right? You listen to the old wise wizard. He says, throw the ring into the mountain, and then okay, that's what I got to do. Don't immediately follow your passion or anything like that. It's pretty bad career advice. But no, we work with prioritization researchers who help us to identify the single the most pressing and the most neglected issues that we face as a species. And there, yes, it is important to count. Like, more is more. Yeah. I think that's a very valuable part of the utilitarian tradition, that it's very interested in numbers. Even though I don't think you necessarily have to be utilitarian to learn how to count, right? And to understand that if you can help two people for the same cost, then that's better than helping one person. So that's basically how we did it. We had a long list of causes we could work on. Obviously, we started in Europe, and we were we thought that one of our strengths would be policy entrepreneurship in Brussels. So we identified some problems like fighting big tobacco. We were like, okay, this is a huge problem. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of life years lost. Very few people are working on it. It's super neglected, and everyone matters. So let's go. Yeah,
no constraints. What would you add to your list from Utopia for Realists? Is there any new utopian idea you
As in crazy utopian ideas?
Yeah.
Don't know. What do you think?
Ooh. I think UBI and open borders are definitely my two top ones.
Yeah.
Because I think my utopian world is where, regardless of where you're born in the social distribution, does not determine where you end up at the end of your life.
Yeah.
So I think a world where like human agency is infinitely enabled and there's no persistence between generations.
Yes. You know, there's one paper about who's the guy? Evan someone who wrote it. It's about the possibility of an ongoing moral catastrophe. That paper made a deep impression on me. He made the simple argument that every society throughout history, every civilization throughout history has always believed that they were the moral ones. They were the civilized ones, right? So the Romans, the ancient Greeks, well, the Romans famously said, like, we're so civilized because we do not sacrifice children to the gods anymore. That's what the barbarians do. But we are civilized. We look at the Romans and we're like, you guys are throwing naked women before lions in the Colosseum. Like, you're monsters. So it might be the case that perhaps finally, you know, we are the civilization that has figured everything out, but like the odds are that we are still doing some things that are pretty terrible. And then I'm not just talking about like the bad MAGA people. No, I'm talking about you. I'm talking about me. You know, we might be involved in some horrible moral catastrophes. For me, the most obvious example here is the way we treat animals, where, yeah, if you just look at the numbers, we're talking about 80 billion land animals slaughtered every year. We've got a mountain of evidence. Every week there's a new paper about how advanced animal sentience is and, you know, how smart pigs are and chickens have empathy and all those kind of things. Even though, like Jeremy Bentham already told us, the only thing that matters is, can they suffer? And the answer seems to be very clear, yes. And it's just an ocean of suffering. We're kind of like gods who have created hell for these animals. And most people just ignore it. Most people are just like, la, 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 it's not happening. So maybe my utopia there would be to not have that dystopia anymore. But maybe, and that's what I appreciate about people in the effective altruism movement who really try to be at the moral frontier. Whereas we at the School for More Ambition, we're really more trying to change the moral mainstream. But effective altruists are really willing to be weird. And for example, I've recently been reading a little bit about what they say about wild animal suffering, and that really melts my brain. Like, that's really, you know, they say, okay, you care about suffering of animals in factory farms. Makes a lot of sense. But then if animals are suffering in nature, like, that's just as bad for the animals, right? And they're like, yes, I can go along with that. And then they say, but what if I tell you that actually nature is not like David Attenborough wants you to believe, right? It's not some kind of Disney world. It's actually a pretty horrific world with a lot of species, you know, who are suffering on an immense scale. Because, for example, like you have a spider that has 50 kids and like 49 die. And it's just like, you say you want to, like, you've got the Franken chickens, right? Who've been evolved by us to be in endless pain. If they would say like, actually, I can point you to some species that have just as horrible lives. Shouldn't we just, you know, make them go extinct as well? Maybe that's moral. And they're like, no, you're like a, you know, then everyone gets really uncomfortable. Yeah. But then at the same time, I'm like, but wait a minute, Rutger. You're a historian. You might very well be completely wrong about this. Yeah. I still, in the end, have a pragmatic attitude here. I'm like, well, let's get rid of factory farming first, and then we'll talk about the other stuff. But I do think we should always be open to the possibility that we might be completely, totally, utterly wrong about some things. Yeah. Maybe to add one thing here is the possibility of AI digital sentience. Again, sounds completely crazy. But then at the same time, I mean, for us, sentience, consciousness, I guess, evolved, I mean, we still barely understand it, right? Yeah. Some people think it's like consciousness is everywhere and we're merely antennas picking it up. I don't know. I just increasingly feel that, yeah, we might be so completely wrong about a couple of things. Yeah. And it might be, might have to open our minds in a pretty radical way.
Yeah, 100%. And I mean, there's the Bentham quote that you cite a few times of like, we shouldn't ask whether they think or they talk, but just whether they suffer. And that's a very different question than one of consciousness. Like, beings without consciousness can also suffer. Yeah. My weird EA take is that American football should be banned, but that can be a conversation for later. Leave that out there. Okay, I know there'll be a lot of questions in the audience, so I want to do one rapid fire round. But before that, I have one final question for you. So in 2019, you went viral for going to Davos and telling people there to pay their taxes. Yeah. So now that it's 7 years later, has anything changed? Do you think you'll ever go back to Davos, or like, how do you think about the global billionaire elite?
Well, for some reason, they're not really inviting me to that conference again. But sure, you can be pessimistic, right? Especially in this country with, what this administration has been doing, massive tax cuts for the super rich. But there's also some reason for optimism. Actually, I was talking about this recently with Gabriel Zucman, who is one of the world's leading economists. He won, the Clark Medal, the baby Nobel, as they call it.
He works with Piketty a lot.
Yeah, with Piketty. He's done a lot of amazing empirical work on inequality, but also on how much do billionaires actually pay in taxes, which when we talk about income tax is literally nothing. Like Jeff Bezos a couple of years ago even claimed family benefits because he was earning so little money. Yes, he's a really poor guy. Zucman is actually surprisingly optimistic. Takes, for example, Switzerland, which used to be a tax haven, and a lot of rich people stashed their money there completely illegally. Well, that's gone now. Under Obama, the US cracked down on it, and boom, turns out that Switzerland is not the most powerful country in the world, and we can do something about it if there's enough political will. There's now also a growing coalition for taxation of the super wealthy. It was actually raised at the G20 during the presidency of Brazil. And South Africa is in favor of it. Germany is very much open to it. So maybe, if we have some luck in this country with, a little bit of a different political outcome, things can suddenly start moving. The ideas are there. There's much more data. There's the science has progressed a lot. A lot of my friends still like dunking on economists because they're they're these neoliberals who believe that all people are selfish. No, I think economics has done so much better actually in, let's say, the last 10 to 15 years. It's become so much more empirical and so much more useful also to society. So that's my optimistic take here.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Okay, I have a quick rapid fire round.
Oh, yeah.
So you can give me one sentence answers,
okay.
But I'll be quick.
I'll do my best. I'm not very good at one sentence answers. But
the last time you changed your mind about something important?
I think in December of last year, when I started using Claude Code, and I became, as they call in Silicon Valley, AGI pilled. I think that, I always thought that AI was going to be important, but now I think the next 3 to 5 years are going to be some of the wildest in human history. And I think we ain't seen nothing yet.
Maybe subset of that. Do you think we're currently headed towards a dystopia or utopia with AI?
I think we're on track for dystopia right now. Yeah.
Cool. Okay. The most underrated change maker of the last century.
I already mentioned Ralph Nader. Can I mention him again? He blew up his reputation in 2000, obviously, because he cost Al Gore the election, which wasn't very morally ambitious. But he's a great inspiration to us. Actually, he's one of the reasons we started this fellowship at Harvard, because we were like, this should actually be possible to build a movement that attracts some of the best and brightest in this country and beyond, to say, hey, we're going to live a life of purpose and impact. And I think what especially fascinated me about that story is how, again, for lack of a better word, how cool it became. At some point, a third of Harvard Law School applied to work for little money for Ralph Nader. So this whole idea that it's all about the money, we'll never be able to compete if we, no, in the end, people are also, status-seeking creatures. They want to be where the action is. They want to have the feeling like this is the coolest thing to do right now. So that's a history that we studied very closely and that we basically want to replicate.
Awesome. One organization or person you disagree with but still admire?
Peter Thiel.
Okay. Why do you admire him?
So I think his book 0 to 1 is one of the best books on building a startup and building an organization. Also hugely inspirational for us. He has this funny observation that, these small groups of committed people that want to change the world, they're often like cults, very obsessed with this one big idea that they believe in. And willing to take a stand for it, willing to come across as weird to the rest of society. Now, what's the opposite of a cult? According to Peter Thiel, it's consultancy, right? It's like you don't really believe in anything. You hop from project to project and you do what's expected of you. So I think that is a great book. And yeah, obviously also his influence on politics has been enormous. And in a way, I think we can learn a lot from the playbook on that side of the political spectrum, whether it's the Heritage Foundation or the Federalist Society. These people have had the perseverance to build the talent pipelines, to build the centers of power. And it took them a long time, but they finally prevailed in the end.
Okay, one sentence. The biggest lie people at Harvard tell ourselves.
Biggest lie people at Harvard tell ourselves. That's a good question. What do you think?
Oh,
Yeah.
Should have prepared these.
Does anyone? What's the biggest lie that people at Harvard tell themselves? That they're the best. Yeah, that. At the same time, as I said, like I do hear a lot from, again, my friends on the left, like, oh, you're at Harvard, they're just a bunch of privileged kids with rich parents. And sure, like I was at the merchandise shop and the lady who was selling me like the little T-shirt for my toddler said, like, there are two reasons why you can be here. Either your parents' names are on one of the buildings, or you're really, I think, smart. Yeah, but that's one option. More options? Yeah.
You have to wait to get to like that.
Yeah. I like that one. Let's pick that one.
Yeah. I think I was also thinking along the lines of, I think for a place with as much privilege and power as Harvard, I actually feel like sometimes people aren't as agentic as I would expect them to be.
Yeah.
And maybe it's just a function of like being here, everyone's really busy, everyone has imposter syndrome, and then you go back out into the world and you realize that you can do things again. But yeah, it's sometimes a little demotivating.
Yeah.
Okay, final one, and then we'll open up for questions. So, a book and a movie that you think everyone in this room must read or watch at least once.
Oh, that's an easy one. Ted Lasso. Yeah.
Okay. Book?
A book. Bury the Chains by Adam Hochschild.
Okay.
An amazing book about the British abolitionist movement.
Awesome. All right, perfect. Thank you so much, Rutger. We'll open it up for questions, and I think we have like 25 minutes, so we can take them one at a time. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, please use the mic in front of you, and if you could introduce yourself briefly.
Hi, my name is Adrienne Leon. I'm a graduate student here. Based off the conversation that you started off with, you have the assumption that people at Harvard come with great privilege and great resources. I was a state school kid. I'm taking on a lot of debt to be here. And I think I wanted to just ask you more at a bigger picture level. Like, we take these jobs because they pay, not that. I think there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of capital and people who are willing to pay you with jobs that then have impact. I know a ton of us are doing unpaid internships this summer and trying to figure out how to make an impact after this that still allows us to live a stable life in the US. It's very expensive here. So my question to you, more big picture, not specifically what you're working on, but big picture, how do you get jobs, more people to create jobs that pay, maybe not as much as consulting, but pay that still make significant impact?
Okay, so if you allow me, I would love to push you a little bit on this one. I think there's a reason that YouTube is full of videos of people opening that letter like, oh, I've been accepted to go to Yale or Princeton or Harvard, and then they start crying. Why do they do that? Because they realize, holy shit, it's my golden ticket into the elite. So sure, I recognize that a lot of people here don't come from privileged backgrounds. Not everyone has the rich parents. But now that you're here, you're in. So I think we really need to stop the elite denial there. You're now part of the elite, right? And that thing, that diploma that you eventually have, that is opening up a lot of doors. That's giving you a lot of opportunities. So that's one. The second thing is, I think, talking to some students here, kind of the feeling that they have this weird idea on how much they need in order to survive. Like, sure, this is an expensive country. I just lived in New York for for a year, and like just was like oatmeal was like $10 or something, and it's like 70 cents back home. So sure, that's expensive, but you know, you need to eat like 3 times a day. You can only drive one car at a time. You can only live in one apartment. Some people, you know, even when they're still relatively young here, think that they really need to earn 150K. Like you can live a really decent life in these jobs that have a lot of impact. I see someone nodding here. Sure, some of these jobs are competitive, but I mean, you're here, so you are competitive, you are ambitious, you are talented. If there is anyone who should be able to get those jobs, it's you. And if those jobs don't exist, then you are the kind of person who should be able to create new initiatives, create new positions for yourself. So I don't know. I have maybe a little bit less sympathy for that. Like, oh, it's so hard for us. We have to go to, you know, we have to go and be an investment banker because otherwise we go hungry or something like that.
Yeah. Am I able to follow up?
Yeah.
Very briefly.
Yeah. I think I'm a graduate school at the Kennedy School, so public policy, the priority is impact, I think, for me and a lot of my colleagues. So I would push back on, yes, I am part of an elite institution, but I would not say that I'm going to skyrocket to become a millionaire or a billionaire because of the degree I've chosen. And then I think my question, I don't think you quite answered it, is more specifically job creation and jobs that will pay. If I want to have a family, I have to have a certain amount of income to give my children 3 meals a day. And understand that maybe it's not 6 figures, but there's still a level of funding that I need to have to sustain a life. And so the question then is, how do you have more jobs that also have an impact so that I can live a life and have children and do what my peers have?
Yeah. So at the School for More Ambition, we've basically identified 3 bottlenecks why people don't live morally ambitious life. One we talked about extensively, it's the prestige thing. So we want to make doing good more prestigious. The second thing is pathways. Like so a lot of people want to have a different career, but they just don't know where to start. So they need all kinds of support. Maybe it's one-on-one career coaching. Maybe it's joining one of our More Ambition circles, which are small groups of 6 to 8 people who come together around the questions in the book and start supporting one another. And it's like, hey, maybe it's this small step that you can take. Maybe it's one of the fellowships. But the third thing is capital. That is a clear bottleneck to moral ambition as well. We've seen it in our fight against big tobacco, right? We send fellows into the field, but this is such an underfunded cause that it's just super hard to earn a living there. Now, I'm super proud that our fellows are still making it because they're, in this case, starting new nonprofits and have been able to convince funders that, you know, this is a really important cause. But it's also one of the reasons why we incubated a new organization called Profit for Good. That is an alliance of companies that all pledge to donate at least 10% of their earnings to some of the highest, the most effective charities. That's also why I'm a member of Giving What We Can, why you are a member of Giving What We Can, because we realize that there need to be more jobs, vacancies for people who want to do this. So it's all of that at the same time. What I would like to emphasize, though, is that sometimes people have this ability, like there's absolutely no possibilities out there. And then I'm like, you know, come to our school, come to other organizations, career advising organizations. There are way more possibilities than people often realize, I think. Maybe it takes a little bit more effort. It's not like, you know, you have like one dinner with a McKinsey recruiter and then boom, you're done. But the possibilities are definitely out there. And yeah, the salaries can also be decent.
Well, maybe we'll collect a few at a time. So yeah, just Jackson and then, sorry. Yeah.
I was one of those Teach for America kids.
Yeah.
And one of the biggest takeaways that I had was how much I underappreciated the importance of localism. And, you know, in college, developed big universalist ideals and had them very challenged by the Teach for America experience. So I'm curious how you think about the interplay of localism and universalism in the way that you structure the fellowships.
And then we had another one down a few rows down. Yeah. Sorry.
That's okay. Hi, thank you for being here. I'm really interested in the mental weight of working with the social impact sector of what it means. Of course, there's also a lot of mental health issues in all of these corporate jobs you mentioned, but I think like it has a different depth when you care about the subject that you're working with, particularly with like that famed phrase like, don't be depressed, there's somebody dying in Africa, or something like that, you know. So I'm really curious on your take of like mental health within the social impact.
Yeah.
So we had one on localism and then mental health.
I'll briefly answer that question first. So one of my great abolitionist heroes is a guy named Thomas Clarkson. He spent like in 1785, he started on a journey traveling 35,000 miles across the United Kingdom to spread the abolitionist propaganda everywhere. He did that for 7 years, and then he had a complete burnout, right? He couldn't walk the stairs anymore. He started sweating profusely whenever he wanted to speak. He was just completely done for. And I read that part of it in his memoirs, and I was like, Clarkson, Thomas, remember your breathing exercises, right? So obviously, getting a burnout is not great for the world. At the same time, if we're going to get a burnout anyway, which is indeed what happens at a lot of these corporate jobs, then at least it's better to do something worthwhile. But yeah, I totally agree with you that it's definitely a risk. If you read the memoirs of some of the great change makers in history, I mean, we remember maybe their successes at the end, but like so much of the memoirs is indeed full of suffering and hard trade-offs and solutions or challenges that don't have an easy solution. I honestly have it in my own life. Like being a writer was just such a relaxed existence. Like absolutely loved it. You can just express your opinions from the sidelines, you know, do some, I think this should happen. And now being in the trenches, building this organization, fundraising for it, it is hard work. It is really hard work. And also the trade-off with family life. I've got 2 young kids, 4 and 1 years old. I often wonder, like, am I a good dad? Like, why am I here right now? And my wife is like, you better come back soon, right? And you've been enjoying yourself at Harvard. That's life. Like, it's difficult. But as I said, if you at the same time have the feeling that at least it's worthwhile. I was like talking to one of our fellows recently who spoke really eloquently about the challenges of, on the one hand, being a mother and wanting to be a good mother, and on the other hand, being a fellow at the School for More Ambition. And she said that it was so much easier now for her to go on a work trip, for example, knowing that if her daughter would be older, the daughter was, I think, 2 years old now, she could explain like, hey, mommy is going, but she's at least going to do important work. So yeah, but don't have easy solutions there. Then your question, I'm actually curious what your answer is, because I've been thinking about it a little bit, but I don't think I have a great answer.
Well, I don't want to like eat up a bunch of time.
Well, maybe you can do it quickly.
Yeah. Really quickly, I think that there's at the universalist level, there's a level of abstraction that then doesn't get so concrete that it dictates what needs to happen at the local level.
Yeah.
And it's important to articulate at the universal level in a way that allows for local expression to be different in different places. And that was one of my issues with Teach for America, was it was articulated too concretely what everybody needed to do in every place. And there's, so that was the source of my question.
Yeah, maybe very briefly, you could argue that a more localist approach to fighting big tobacco would be getting into the neighborhoods, perhaps, and teaching people about how bad cigarettes are. I personally would hate that approach. I think it would be very paternalistic. And I'm a much bigger believer in the power of policy here. Like the European Union, it's pretty big. You know, we've got regulation for 500 million people. We've got the upcoming, new taxation rules, the tobacco directive. I think we're doing exactly the right thing by putting the right people in the right room at the right time. Indeed, on a somewhat abstract level, but in the end, it's real power that we're talking about. It's really regulating these companies. So here I think we just got to be pragmatic and indeed realize that sometimes if you're at a higher level of abstraction, you can lose sight of what the problem actually is. But I think like an organization like Give Directly came to the conclusion that indeed people themselves are the real experts on their own lives. Like the poor often know what's best for them. And then just giving them the money is basically a recognition of that localism. but then you still better fundraise a hell of a lot of money to, to distribute it.
Okay. Yeah, we'll do a quick round here. Okay, let me go to the middle section. I'll come back. Pooja.
Thank you. First, Rutger, you're very lucky to have one of our best and brightest as your moderator today.
Yeah, absolutely.
She paid me to say that.
I was actually a little bit nervous as I read all your questions in advance. Yeah.
I was curious around, you talked at the very beginning about how students will write these incredible admissions essays that demonstrate a lot of idealism and moral ambition that gets lost perhaps somewhere along the way. Do you think that is actually the case, that at 18 everyone is very ideal and morally ambitious? Or is that an illusion also incentivized by, you kind of have to say you want to save the world to get into places like Harvard? And should there be interventions earlier in our childhood education to cultivate more of that moral ambition?
Do you mind if I collect a few?
Yeah,
Just to
there's some of that. I think the normal thing, sorry. The normal thing if you're 18 or 19 years old is that you have no clue. Like you're so young. And honestly, that is partially what depresses is maybe not the right word, but when I'm speaking to undergraduates here, I'm like, come on, take a few years, right? In the Netherlands, where I'm from, at least when I graduated, it was kind of normal. You graduate maybe when you're 24 or something, and you take a gap year, and everyone was delayed, and then you start working maybe when you're 25. And here, these people, who are already starting startups on the side when they're 20, I guess. I'm impressed, but at the same time, like, take some time, figure out who you are. That's one thought. On the other thing I'd say is that I think there's a lot of genuine idealism. I do think so. Again, today at campus, speaking to a lot of students, I do feel that, and it saddens me a lot that we have this huge career funneling industry that hammers that idealism out of people. And I think that should end.
I'll collect a few. Yeah, you there. Green shirt, yes. Yeah.
My question actually directly wanted to speak to that. As a fellow European, also love Ted Lasso. It's great because it plays so well with differences between Americans and Europeans.
Yeah.
And what I also find mind-boggling here is like sort of that the American youth has kind of been taken away. Like, American parents send their kids to these SAT prep schools, like for summer camp, instead of like letting them play soccer or whatever.
Yeah.
And then like already during college, like there's like this hustle culture here. You have to do this and that and 10 clubs and like never have any free time. And I also very much enjoyed my undergrad life in Berlin, like having a lot of beers and like not really having to write any papers. And I think sort of like that massively plays into sort of that Europeans are very moral, but not very ambitious. Like, friends back home who are like 26 to 30 years old, barely any of them have real jobs, but they're really smart, talented people. They're rather like our baristas. I think to some degree that is probably a cost of living thing also. I think that goes to the earlier question. But I think in Europe we actually have a very different problem to Americans, which is like, how do we ignite that ambition? Versus Americans is like, how do we ignite that moralness? I think that goes to the second question I wanted to ask. I really like your distinction between effective altruism and sort of universalism, because I think effective altruism, at least in some circles, has actually reached a point where it might be actively harmful. I don't think we need more sort of like talented economists like figuring out quality life years safe, because I think that is like bogus anyway. Because like it takes people away from tackling these immaterial questions, like how do we like save American democracy, like how do we sort of avoid dystopia on these like values. So I would love to know both like America, Europe, and that sort of how do we like actually motivate people for immaterial values.
Last one.
This is very different from any of the questions that you asked and probably out of context. But I'm a huge Carl Sagan fan, and I'm a student at the Kennedy School studying public policy. So I've been trying to figure out, is advancing humankind to becoming an interplanetary species moral ambition, or just a misappropriation of resources?
Awesome. Okay, I'm going to take one more from this section. Lena?
Yeah. Thank you. Hi, I'm Lena. Also a school between the Kennedy School and the business school, but not as amazing as Ruby. But
my question is sort of around this idea of going after the prestige and whether we're sort of playing into the same values that have created the societal ills that you're sort of going after. And so by, if prestige sort of represents this like more, I want to be at the top, power consolidation, are we sort of doing harm by continuing to play into that value?
Awesome. Okay. US EO, institutional change, interplanetary.
I was already
species.
thinking already with the first question, I'm never going to remember all of this. Great question. Maybe start with, I think it is part of human nature that we are, not completely, but we are status-seeking creatures, right? A lot of us, in the end, we want a pat on the back, right? We want our parents to say, "I'm proud of you." We want society to say, "Well done." And you know what? I think that's okay. Obviously, it can get out of hand. It can become very toxic. But you want to channel that energy, I think, in a positive direction. We've had a similar discussion around masculinity, right? When people started talking about toxic masculinity, that's a very bad thing, like Andrew Tate, and it's horrible. But then if toxic masculinity exists, then the opposite has to exist as well, right? I don't know, a form of, I would call Ted Lasso masculinity, like a positive form, maybe heroic masculinity, using what you have, your strength, maybe also your competitive drive to make a big difference and to help others. And so that's what I think we got to try and do here. Recognize that this is one part of human nature, and we got to try and channel that energy in a positive direction. Maybe one of those positive directions could indeed be Mars. I've always loved space, right? I've always, as a young boy, to push the human frontier. I think that it's always been an amazing dream. It just saddens me a lot that now it's become like this sociopath billionaire dream, and that it's not our thing anymore. But I thought, indeed, America going to the moon and that being a galvanizing mission for the whole nation was a pretty awesome thing. I'm just sad that it's not like this social democratic mission anymore, where we bring the whole nation together and all the talented people and say, we're going to do this crazy thing that, is maybe too crazy and we'll never be able to achieve it. No, it's become some billionaire's dream. So I would love to make it a social democratic, universalist, humanist aspiration again. And also to be proud of what we be bringing there. Because now I feel like if we expand to Mars, what are we bringing there? Fascism? Doesn't sound very great. Now, your question, I agree with you very much about your US-Europe observations. It's exactly how I feel, indeed, that it's very difficult to be ambitious in Europe, and it's sometimes a little bit difficult to be moral in this country. What I loved about coming to America, we just lived in New York for a year when my wife was with my family, and I had a dinner that was organized by one of our board members, and there were a lot of, successful entrepreneurs, people in media invited there. And they were all like, okay, so you're trying to build this global movement of ambitious idealists that will tackle the greatest challenges we face as a species? Sure, that's going to work out. Go you. How can I help? Now, in the Netherlands, if I would have done that, I wouldn't even dare to say it out loud. People would have said, oh, you're nuts. That's never going to work out. So I found that really liberating, actually, to be in a more ambitious culture. At the same time, we moved back after a year, after we had our child in a 3K school in New York, and we were just horrified. You keep these kids in a room without windows all day. They never go outside to play. I was so horrified by all these toddlers strapped up in their strollers, 5, 6 year old kids in their strollers in Brooklyn. My wife and I were saying to each other, free the kids. We were is the parent not watching? Let's liberate them. As a European, it just hurts so much to see how they're breaking the spirits of these kids at a very young age already. So then the other thing, don't dunk that hard on the qualis and the dalis. I actually like that. There's a lot of value that I think also the effective altruism movement and the randomista movement brought. A lot of rigor to development economics. I think that is a valuable thing, to think hard about, on the margin, what can be the most effective interventions. Yes, we also need like more structural interventions. Absolutely. I think that's would be one of my critiques of effective altruism. It has completely ignored the destruction of democracy in this country. And boom, USAID is gone. Well, shouldn't we have tried and prevent that? Like, if you look at the whole Kamala Harris campaign operation, like, I would have loved it if a couple of like nerd EAs would have helped them set up the data infrastructure, because it's totally terrible. They did everything on vibes. Like that whole Democratic Party is real. Well, maybe I'm.
Okay. Yeah. Let's do
Thank
the
you for
section,
your-
Aliana. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Anyone from this section? Yeah, go ahead. Do you mind switching on the mic in front of you? Yeah.
Hi, I'm from Brown University actually, and I'm studying international and public affairs. I wanted to ask about the last person asked a question kind of related to that, and I know in chapter 3 and 4 of your book you talk about kind of the idea of effective idealism and pragmatism, and it kind of like you talk about how in the civil rights movement, like there's a lot of things behind it to make it seem palatable, like how like using people that would be more palatable for image, or like trying to make a lot of money that you could donate and stuff. Kind of what's most effective. And I was wondering, and my thing was that how long are we gonna, to what extent are we going to just focus on the goal and the effectiveness of something to the point where the principles goes away, the principles of our purpose, the principles of our actions, and like a lot of actions like making a lot of money. I mean, you could become like a billionaire and make a lot of money. I mean, you can get to a position you have a lot of money to donate, but then in that on your path to get there, you'll probably cause a lot of harm and do more evil than good. And it's like that thing of between principles and end goals, and how would you navigate that?
Yes, that's a great question.
Thank
Do you mind if you connect
and there's no easy answer to it. I really want to, sorry,
Okay,
because
go ahead.
otherwise I lose my train of thought.
Go ahead.
There's no easy answer to it. If I look at what happened in the effective altruism movement, for example, it was a movement that was obsessed for a long time with like, how do we calculate, in the best possible way, how we can use what we have to make the biggest possible difference, right? Very consequentialist, and at some point also going off the rails. Like famously, we had the whole Sam Bankman-Fried scandal and the downfall of FTX, and that was a case where you could say like, hey, maybe you took things a tiny little bit too far there. What I think is interesting is that a lot of EA has now pivoted towards an approach towards virtue ethics. And you could say that virtue ethics is just utilitarianism for people with epistemic humility. So virtue ethics is basically where you say, you got to be honest, you got to be brave, you got to be rigorous, etc. I think like on the margin, I would push people to be more, especially on my side of the political spectrum, I would push people to be more consequentialist. During the so-called Great Awakening a couple of years ago, we had so many social justice warriors who were more obsessed with, what words they used to describe all the injustice in the world than actually achieving results. And we should always remember that the people who currently suffer from oppression, from poverty, from exploitation, they want you to win. They don't care about the fact that you are right, that you, are morally pure. They want you to actually achieve results. But obviously, there are always limits to that pragmatism. And and that's why you should watch Ted Lasso. Yeah. And I think that something like, for example, kindness, never treating other people as a means to an end, but always as ends in themselves. Those things are like unnegotiable to me.
But what about in a structural sense? And like a structural approach to like the issues we're tackling? How can we put those limits?
I'm not sure I'm
like those kind of when we in a structural approach, how do you make sure that to what extent are we just going for an end, and making sure we consider means, making sure we don't lose principles, and in a more structural sense.
Like how you build those values into a community, for example.
Movements, communities, institutions, things like that.
So what we did when we started the School for More Ambition, we spent quite some time thinking about our founding principles. And some of those founding principles are really action and are more consequentialist. So like action is number 1, impact is number 2. But then number 5 is indeed kindness. And that is something that we're trying to make a part of our community. so there's sometimes tension indeed between these principles. Like sometimes, like in the short term, it might be more effective to, I don't know, if someone is doing a really bad job, to fire that person immediately. It's much easier in this country. Not really the European approach. Like we try to be a little bit kinder to people in that respect. So I think you gotta try and bake those things into your movement and be very deliberate about it.
Okay. I think we have time for like 2 more. So Lincoln, go ahead.
Thank you for facilitating this conversation, and thank you for being the conversation. I don't want to get too meta here, but I think it's important to clarify and maybe even nuance the assumptions that we're basing our ideas off of. Rutger, how exactly would you define a morally ambitious career? To you, for the school, for us as potential change makers, is it something within the self that maybe valorizes or drives the need to make this impact? Or is it defined by the outcomes, a more like consequentialist approach and the way that you're using your ambition to make impact?
I am really a pluralist here, a motivational pluralist. Some people tell me, Rutger, what you're doing with these billionaires, you're shaming them. Shame doesn't work. I'm like, shaming works really well. Like, I've experienced a lot. My mom has done it so much to me. It works incredibly well. There's a reason, like, why we humans are one of the few species in the animal kingdom with the ability to blush, right? So shame can work. Sometimes it doesn't. Then maybe we need to make people enthusiastic, or we need to hack the status game, right? It depends. You really need to have a pluralist approach there to build a coalition that is broad enough.
Liana?
So I'm a little uneasy with the proposition, you take a consulting job, you go to hell. And I'm sensing this, dichotomy, some moral jobs in philanthropy, amoral jobs, corporate jobs. Why is it that you're thinking that there is this inevitable corruption that comes with certain careers or choices? Why wouldn't the mission be to try and ensure that whoever gets at the top of politics or corporations operates with certain principles, and within the system we have tries to improve it? Maybe you say, we've tried for decades, it's not working. Mm-hmm. Is that where you come from? Is there something else? Because eventually, you said yourself what happened with during Obama's administration, Switzerland, eventually having people with certain principles in the positions that matter generates change that affects, thousands, millions of people. Why not invest in that as a school of moral ambition?
So the words you use are the positions that matter. And that's exactly what this is all about. Like, we want to get the right people in the right rooms at the right time with the right ideas. So I totally agree with that. A lot of what we teach at the School for More Ambition is policy entrepreneurship, or also intrapreneurship, like how can you change an organization from the inside. But no, I'm still not convinced that, going to, let's say, a Bain or a McKinsey is like a great option there. And it's not because you'd be a bad person or anything like that. It's not like you'll do some good work. Like, I like to have a better mayonnaise jar. So if a team of McKinsey consultants give me like the best possible mayonnaise jar after an extensive analysis, then it's not bad for the world. It's just kind of a waste of talent, because you could have done so much more with that.
Or maybe they're working on a merger where instead of firing half of the workforce of those two firms, they come up with a solution where people keep their jobs.
Sure, yeah.
All I'm trying to say is that I know plenty of students here who come in with exactly those ideals, and I don't want to think that they're wasting their lives if they take a
You don't
job.
like to think that. I get that. But I would really like to push you a little bit. I think that Harvard has really, and other elite universities as well, have really abdicated their responsibility here. That there's this huge career funneling that's been going on. So many really bright students funneled into these jobs that indeed are not all net negative. I'm not the kind of leftist who says like all bankers, they only destroy value. I understand that there's a need for a financial sector, but I really doubt that this is the best allocation of talent, like 50% going into consultancy, finance, and tech. Is that logical? And then the university that says, hey, yeah, this is just free choice. It's not free choice. I mean, you allow these corporations to come on campus, to start, recruiting these people already when they're in their first year, their sophomore year, they're being wined and dined. Like, you have a responsibility there, right? And I get it that, as a university, you like to think that these students, will go on and do great things. But you don't just do the work. The work also works on you. So when I look at my friends, and also some ambitious friends, when I look at people in our community and they look at their friends who went on, to go into the Bermuda Triangle of talent, some get out, like you, most don't. And most also change as a person, they get used to the golden handcuffs. They become more cynical. And at the end of it all, no, they haven't made that big contribution to society. And when I look at the slogans of those, beautiful universities, I was at Princeton recently. The slogan at Princeton is like, in service of, society, humanity. I'm like, really? Well, do better.
Amazing. I think that's a great note to end on. Thank you very much. Thank you for being here. Rutger does have to run away soon after, but yeah, to the extent that you have some time. Feel free to come.
Thanks for coming, everyone.
Thank you.